here's the situation. I am waiting on a call from a man who might be offering me a job or is calling to reject me, which doesn't really make sense because he emailed to ask if there was a time to call. So I'm once again full of anxiety. But we're gonna be productive with that. And I was doing some writing, but then I got sort of too anxious. So now I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in August. My birthday's in August, so it's my favorite month. The books I read this month, some great ones. I was in Boston. I actually bought a lot of books in Boston, so I might try and make a video where I force myself to read all the books I got on that trip. 2 of them are in this stack, so I'm already partway there. Is that enough preamble? Should we just get into it? I gotta flip these. There we go. Starting off with the book I finished August 1st, so technically I read it in July. That is Mrs. Jack, a biography of Isabella Stewart Gardner. Now, this is one of those books that I've owned for several years and never finished, but the trip to Boston finally inspired me to finish it because Isabella Stewart Gardner is, of course, the founder of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And this is a biography from like the 60s, all about her life, written by Louise Hall Tharp. Wow, she was kind of a menace. I don't know that I needed to learn that much about her, but I did. It was informative, I'll say that. The way it was written, I'm not sure if it was the writer or if it was the nature of the primary sources that were available, but a lot of it was stuff taken from like gossip magazines, which I didn't love. But I did go visit the museum when I was in Boston twice, and it was wonderful. Just such a great art collection in that place. And there's Sargent's portrait of her on the back. So that's nice. And then I also found out that there was a new biography of her published in, I think, 2024. And I didn't know about it because I bought this one in 2021. And this was the most updated biography at that point. So, oh well. I don't know if I'm gonna read the new one because, like, how much new information could there possibly be? That was the first book I read. Second book, This Is How You Lose the Time War. I mentioned in the first video I posted that I had just reread this, so of course it's on the wrap-up. Is there a lot I need to say about it? No. If you've never read it, listen, I'm not gonna force ya, but I've read it 4 times, so clearly that's an endorsement. It gets better every time, which not every book does on a reread, I feel. And I don't want to tell you anything about it if you haven't read it, because I think the best way to enjoy it is to go in blind. But I will say, Amal Motar, Max Gladstone, the sentences coming off of these bad boys, it's just great. I finally went through and I underlined things. I've got an annotated copy now because I had a pen with me on this trip. I read it on the Boston trip because I was in Boston alone on my birthday, and I went to the public library, the Central Branch, the one with all the Sargent murals, and I sat in the Bates room, I think that's what it's called, whatever one that has all the green lamps and you have to be silent, and I sat in there for like an hour and a half and I just read this book, and honestly, one of the best birthdays I've ever had. Oh, I love reading! Moving on. Next up, we've got the first book I purchased on this Boston trip, which I also then read on the trip, and that is the Raven Boys graphic novel. And this, let me tell you, was a delight. The art style is adorable. I thought they adapted it well. Now, it's been many years since I read the original Raven Boys, so perhaps some things were missing that if I had been more up to date, I would have noticed, but to me it really just felt like reading the story I love again in a new way, and that's really all you can ask for from an adaptation. It was great, and I can't wait for the rest of the graphic novels. If they're just as adorable as this, I'm gonna be happy. So yeah, the Raven Boys graphic novel, written by Maggie Stiefvater, adapted by Stephanie Williams, illustrated by Sass Millage. What a great team. Made me very happy. Again, do you need to know anything about the Raven Boys? I would suggest maybe reading the novel first, unless you're a really big graphic novel fan, and then honestly I think you could dive right into the story in this format and it would be just as enjoyable. But just know my experience is going the other way around. So I don't know for certain. You know what The Raven Boys is about. Next up, now we're back from Boston. Monsters, a rec from Lena Norms, which again I've owned I think for like a year. It's all about kind of interrogating these terrible artists and the link between genius and monstrosity. What do we do about Picasso or Michael Jackson or Sylvia Plath even comes up, like these people who maybe did bad things, Hemingway, Woody Allen, Miles Davis, people who were in their actions kind of evil, but who created great art. It was written very well. It steered a little bit biographical, which I actually really enjoyed. Claire Dederer, she's a great writer. I don't know, the way she structured this book, it was kind of going through the process of having the idea for this book and taking us through her investigations into this topic and kind of how she realized that the questions she was asking was sort of flawed and how she worked through that. And there's details from her own life. There's a lot of research, very well written, very well executed, and I think came to a conclusion, which I remember Lena Norms saying this in the video where she recommended it, which is why I even picked it up. She comes to a conclusion in this that I think is actually a better answer than anything floating around on the internet in the age of canceling celebrities and whatnot. So I do recommend if you're interested in that kind of thing. I, as an art history major, was kind of interested in it from that lens. Like, how do we reconcile great artists, which that's a whole other video, but how do we reconcile great art and the maybe not so great people who made that art? And I found it very enjoyable. So there we go. All right, we're halfway through. We're flying through this thing. Next up we have what was technically a DNF, but I DNF'd it at like 80%. So I feel like I read it, and that is the only ebook on this list, My Salty Mary. Now, I think I didn't enjoy it because I'm not the target audience for this book. I'm not a young adult literature fan anymore. It certainly had its place in my childhood and teenage years, but it's been a long time since I read a young adult book, I guess, other than the Raven Boys graphic novel, which I just read. But it's been a while since I read a new to me young adult book and enjoyed it. And so I didn't enjoy this one. My Salty Mary, it's by Brody Ashton, Cynthia Hand, and Jody Meadows, and they're the people who wrote My Lady Jane, which I read back in 2017 or whatever and loved. And then when the TV show came out, as we've already established, I watched it all in Rome and I loved that. They definitely bumped up the age bracket though. And this one, I gave it a try because it was dealing with real historical pirates. I love the history of Anne Bonny, Mary Read, Calico Jack, all that stuff. You know me, I'm a pirate girl. Well, maybe you don't, but you do now. But the way, and I get that like this was the point, that they make up history, like they're just sort of using the names and everything else is made up. And they also tied in the Little Mermaid, and so there's this whole like magical element to it that just did not work for me. Like I said, I'm not the intended audience at all. So if you like that series, if you like young adult books, I think, yeah, it was definitely, I could see how it was a fun time for people who like that kind of thing. I read it mostly on planes. And then once I was off the plane and I hadn't yet finished it, I decided that's enough. Moving on, we've got the second book on this list that I picked up in Boston. And this was a book I'd never heard of, but it was on the staff recs list at the Beacon Hill Bookshop and Cafe, which was one of the most adorable bookstores I've ever been to. Anyway, the book is Freshwater for Flowers by Valerie Perrine. This is a translated book. Hold on. Translated from the French by Hildegard Surlet. I don't speak French. I would say the first 80 or so pages of this book, absolutely exquisite. I loved it. Let me tell you what it's about. It's about this woman who's a caretaker at a cemetery in a small town in France, and she just has this like positive outlook on life that I love in books about grief, because this really deals with grief a lot. I've said many times, I'm not a sad book girl, and so if I thought this was going to be a sad book, I would not have picked this up. And I would say ultimately it was not a sad book, but it definitely had its moments. About the 150 page mark or so, it gets very dark very quick, and then we're sort of dealing with that, and there was like a mystery element to it that I was not expecting, and so I ended up not enjoying it as much as I thought I would when I started it. Because again, the first 80 pages were just in this woman's life in this cemetery and all the people she meets and like the graves she takes care of and the cats. There's so many cats, and that was wonderful. And ultimately I think it pulled itself out of that dark rut. Did I enjoy the whole journey? No. I'm still glad I read it though, because it was definitely a book outside of what I normally gravitate towards. And sometimes I get tired of the bestseller lists and the TikTok books and all of my shelves full of the books that I've already heard everyone else talk about. And I want to try reading something that I've never heard of. Maybe, I mean, it is a national bestseller, so maybe I'm the only one who had never heard of it, but it still counts. And I would recommend, if it sounds interesting to you with the cemetery and the mystery elements, and definitely look up some content warnings, I would recommend. 2 more, and then we're out of here, and hopefully I'll get the phone call right when I finish recording. Next up is A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers, the second Monk and Robot book. Why did I read this? Well, I read the first one a year or 2 ago. This is like how every story about every book I've read goes. I read the first one several years ago, and now I'm finally getting around to the sequel. I did not enjoy it as well. I enjoyed it not as much as the first one, and if I hadn't been incredibly bored, I don't think I would have read it, but it's quite short, and it was fine. That's sort of my review. It was fine. I like the world. I don't know that Becky Chambers' writing is for me, at least not in a novella format. And maybe I'll make a video where I talk about what makes a good novella to me, because I think I have very specific criteria and this just didn't hit that. But like I've said, the greatest compliment I can bestow on a writer is that they can craft a sentence. And I just don't know that Becky Chambers has that for me. I thought the characters were funny, if a little bit annoying. I love the robot. Moscap can do no wrong. And I liked the world, but I just didn't love the way the story was told to me. And I also thought it was maybe missing a couple more elements that would have made it kind of a more robust story. And I think it's really difficult to write a good novella, which is why I'm sort of being so cagey with this review, because it's I don't think a fault of the book. I don't know that I necessarily have high standards. I just have very specific standards that this did not meet for me. But if you're like me and you read the first one and you enjoyed it, I felt sort of lukewarm about it back then. So maybe I shouldn't have read the sequel, but I already owned it because somebody gave it to me. They're not very long. It was like, took me less than an afternoon, I think, to finish this. A Prayer for the Crown Shy, not my fave, I'm sorry to say. Last one on this list, the book I finished August 30th, and maybe one of my faves of the month, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This book wowed me. This is another one, like the Isabella biography, that I've had on my shelves since 2021, and I made a pact with myself this year that I would try to finish as many of those as possible. So that's really why I picked this up, and it was incredible. I feel like I haven't actually seen anyone on the internet talk about this book. I'm sure people are reading it, and that's just me. The only booktuber I watch is Carrie. Carrie can read. And I don't think she's read this, and if she has, I haven't seen that video. So that's kind of the standard. When I say the internet, I mean Carrie. But I really loved it. And I feel like it's healing my relationship to fantasy. Like when I say I want an epic fantasy, this is what I mean. This is what I mean. The characters were also interesting and complicated and had these, I mean, the magic was just incredible. There are different abilities, but how they kind of intermingle and exist in different parts of the world, but then come together. Like the way she set everything up and slowly wove it together, I loved it. I was obsessed. I want the next one immediately. And it's sitting on my shelf. I have the second and the third books in this trilogy that I'm gonna start maybe once I turn off this camera, if I don't get that call. Because I just loved the world and being in it, and I loved the characters, and it was like a kind of fantasy I'd never read before. It's inspired by the civilizations of the pre-Columbian Americas, which Rebecca Roanors said that like was her goal, was to take epic fantasy and put it in a setting that she had never seen it done in before, and I think she did a fantastic job. I'm obsessed with this world, I'm obsessed with the characters, I need to know what happens next. There are sort of pirate ship mermaid shenanigans, and that's one way to sell me. I guess, as long as it's adult, because clearly I read a young adult book this month with that description that did not sell me. But this one did. This one was great. And I can't wait. I can't believe it took me so long to read it, except that I was in college for the 4 years that I've owned it and not really reading books of this length. But now that I'm out and free, I will be reading more. And I'm excited. So yeah, those are all the books. Should we hold them up again? Ta-da! These are all the books that I read in August. Yeah, I don't really have an outro. I just kind of end these things. So that's it. They were great. All I can say. Literally, I hit stop recording. There's a plane. I don't care. And he called me and offered me the job. So I have a job! I guess bye, YouTube. It's only like 18 hours a week, so I might stick around. We'll see. Wild.